Tonight, I'm sharing a story that will make you question everything you know about fate, power, and survival. A nameless girl, invisible to an empire that destroyed her family, becomes the only person who can save a dying king by completing a bond that could kill them both. This is the story of Arden Miles, the queen no one saw coming. Stay until the end to see how she rewrote the rules of an entire world. And don't forget to hit that like button and comment which city you're watching from. The Grand Hall of the Drelor Palace was a spectacle that could make even the most jaded wolf shifter catch their breath. Chandeliers carved from wolf-blessed silver hung like frozen waterfalls from vaulted ceilings, each crystal catching firelight and throwing it across marble floors that had witnessed 3 centuries of coronations, executions, and broken oaths. Tonight, those floors gleamed under the polished boots of every ranking alpha in the fractured empire, all gathered for the Lunar Assembly. A gathering that happened once every 5 years, where alliances were forged, treaties signed, and power consolidated under the iron rule of the Wolf Throne. Arden Miles moved through it all like smoke. She kept her eyes down, her steps quiet, her tray balanced with the kind of precision that came from years of being told that even breathing too loud could get her thrown into the streets. At 23, she'd learned to make herself smaller than her already slight frame suggested. Her dark hair was pulled back in a severe bun that made her pale face look even sharper, all angles and shadows. The servant's uniform she wore, gray wool that scratched against her skin, was 2 sizes too large, swallowing her whole. Intentional. The less of her there was to see, the safer she was. Around her, the court exploded in laughter and conversation. Alphas in ceremonial armor traded insults that sounded like compliments. Their mates, draped in silks that cost more than Arden would earn in a lifetime, whispered behind jeweled fans. The air was thick with the scent of roasted meat, spiced wine, and the underlying musk of wolf dominance, a cocktail that made Arden's stomach turn, though she'd never let it show. She'd been serving in the Drelor Palace for 3 years. 3 years of invisibility. 3 years of survival. No one here knew her real name. No one knew that 15 years ago, she'd been Arden Miles of the Miles bloodline, a family that had once controlled the Eastern Territories, that had sat on the Council of Pax, that had commanded respect and fear in equal measure. All of that had burned the night her family was branded traitors, their lands seized, their name erased from every official record. Arden had been 8 years old, small enough to hide in a laundry cart while soldiers tore through her home. Small enough to survive. She'd learned early that survival meant silence. "More wine, girl!" The command came from Lord Varys Keldon, a thick-necked alpha whose breath already reeked of alcohol. Arden moved forward without meeting his eyes, tilting the carafe to refill his goblet. Her hands didn't shake. They never did anymore. "You're new," Varys said, squinting at her. "Haven't seen you before." "I've been here 3 years, my lord." Her voice was soft, colorless, forgettable. He grunted, already losing interest. "We'll keep the wine coming. This whole spectacle is duller than a council meeting." Arden bowed slightly and retreated, weaving between tables laden with enough food to feed her old neighborhood for a month. She'd grown up in the Hollow Quarter now, the part of the capital where wolves who'd lost their packs ended up. Lone wolves, outcasts, criminals. People like her. She shared a room the size of a closet with 2 other servants, and every coin she earned went toward keeping a roof over her head and food in her stomach. There was no room for pride, no room for the past, but the past had a way of clinging to you, no matter how hard you scrubbed. Across the hall, seated on a throne that looked like it had been carved from a single piece of obsidian, was Alpha King Caius Drelor. Arden had seen him before, of course. Everyone had. You didn't work in the palace for 3 years without catching glimpses of the man who ruled the fractured wolf empire with a combination of brutal efficiency and cold calculation. But she'd never been this close, never had a reason to look directly at him. She did now. Caius Drelor was 31 years old and looked like violence given form. Tall, easily 6'4", with broad shoulders that filled out his black ceremonial coat like he'd been born wearing it. His hair was dark, almost black, cut short enough to be practical, but long enough to suggest he didn't give a damn about fashion. Sharp jawline, high cheekbones, and eyes the color of winter storms, pale gray that seemed to see through everything and everyone. He didn't smile, didn't laugh, didn't engage with the alphas who kept trying to catch his attention. He just sat there, radiating the kind of power that made grown men hesitate before speaking. Arden had heard the stories. Everyone had. Caius Draylor had taken the throne at 18 after his father's sudden death, a death that most people believe Caius himself had orchestrated, though no one dared say it out loud. In the 13 years since, he'd crushed 3 separate rebellions, expanded the empire's borders, and rejected every single mate bond the moon goddess had ever tried to forge for him. Rejected. Not ignored. Rejected. It was unheard of. The mate bond was sacred, an unbreakable tie between souls that transcended politics and power. To reject it was to spit in the face of the goddess herself. But Caius had done it. 4 times, according to the rumors. 4 women who'd felt the bond snap into place, only to have him look them in the eye and say a single word. No. No one knew why. No one dared ask. Arden turned away, refocusing on her work. The less she thought about the Alpha King, the better. Men like him existed in a different world, one she'd never touch again. She was a shadow now. Shadows didn't draw attention. But then the music stopped. It happened so suddenly that Arden froze mid-step, nearly spilling the wine she was carrying. Around her, conversations died. The entire hall went silent, hundreds of wolves turning toward the front of the room where an elderly woman had risen from her seat beside the throne. The Queen Mother. Elara Draylor was 73 years old and looked like she could kill you with a glance. Silver hair pulled back in an elaborate braid, sharp green eyes that missed nothing, and a spine so straight it could have been made of steel. She wore mourning black. She always wore black, ever since her mate had died. But the simplicity of her dress only made her more imposing. When the Queen Mother stood, you paid attention. "Forgive the interruption," Elara said, her voice carrying across the hall without her needing to raise it. "But there is a matter that cannot wait." Caius's expression didn't change, but Arden saw his hand tighten on the arm of his throne. Barely. Just a fraction. "The moon goddess has spoken," Elara continued, and Arden's blood went cold. "She has revealed a bond. Here, tonight." The hall erupted. Whispers turned to shouts. Alphas rising from their seats. Mates clutching each other's hands. A bond revealed at the lunar assembly? It was unprecedented. Dramatic. The kind of thing that would be talked about for decades. Arden felt the tray slip from her hands before she even registered the movement. It hit the floor with a crash that sounded like an explosion in the sudden silence. Wine spreading across the marble like blood. Every eye in the hall turned to her. No, this wasn't possible. Alara's gaze locked onto Arden, and the old woman's expression shifted. Surprise, then something else. Recognition? But that was impossible. Arden had been a child when the Miles family fell. No one recognized her. No one. "You," Elara said, pointing directly at Arden. "Step forward." Arden couldn't move. Her legs had turned to stone. Around her, wolves were staring, whispering, their eyes burning into her skin. She felt exposed, like someone had ripped away the invisibility she'd spent 3 years building. "I said step forward, child." Somehow, Arden's feet obeyed. She walked toward the throne on legs that felt like they belonged to someone else, her heart slamming against her ribs so hard she thought it might break through. The distance between her and the dais felt infinite and instantaneous all at once. When she reached the steps, she dropped into a bow so low her forehead nearly touched the floor. "What is your name?" Elara asked. Arden's throat closed. She couldn't say it. Couldn't speak the name that had been erased from every record, every history book, every... "Your name," Elara repeated, sharper now. "Arden." The word came out barely above a whisper. She didn't give her last name. Couldn't. "Arden," Elara repeated, as if testing the weight of it. Then she turned to Caius. "My son, look at her." For the first time, Caius Draylor's gaze dropped from the middle distance and landed on Arden. The bond hit her like a freight train. It wasn't gentle. Wasn't the romantic, soul-deep recognition the stories talked about. It was fire and ice and electricity all at once. A connection that snapped into place so violently Arden gasped, her hands flying to her chest as if she could physically pull it out. Heat spread through her veins, foreign and overwhelming, and underneath it all was him, his presence, his emotions, his rage. Caius stood slowly, his expression carved from granite. When he spoke, his voice was low and lethal. "No." The single word cut through the bond like a blade. severing something before it could fully form. Arden felt it tear, felt the connection fray and snap, and the pain was so sudden and complete that she staggered, barely catching herself on the edge of the dais. Around them, the hall exploded. "Your Majesty, this is unprecedented. The goddess herself." I said no. Caius's voice didn't rise, but it silenced every other sound in the room. He descended the steps of the throne, each movement controlled, deliberate. When he reached Arden, he looked down at her with those winter storm eyes and spoke loud enough for the entire hall to hear. "I reject this bond. I reject this girl. Whatever the moon goddess intended, it ends here." Arden couldn't breathe, couldn't think. The pain in her chest had shifted into something hollow, something worse than pain. Emptiness. She'd been rejected. Publicly, in front of every ranking wolf in the Empire. She should have been relieved, should have been grateful. This was a disaster averted, a spotlight she'd never wanted turned off before it could burn her alive. But all she felt was the absence of something she'd had for less than a minute. Ilara stepped forward, her expression thunderous. "Caius, the matter is closed, Mother." He turned his back on Arden, on the entire hall, and walked toward the doors. "This assembly is over." And just like that, it was done. The crowd began to disperse, alphas and their mates filing out with expressions ranging from shock to barely concealed delight. Scandal was currency in the court, and this was enough scandal to last years. Arden stood frozen on the dais, her hand still pressed to her chest, her mind spinning. Around her, servants began cleaning up the spilled wine, the broken glass, the mess she'd made. Someone grabbed her arm. Another servant, an older woman whose name Arden couldn't remember. "Come on, girl, get out of here before someone decides you're worth punishing." Arden let herself be pulled away, her feet moving on autopilot. She made it back to the servants' quarters without remembering the walk, collapsed onto her narrow cot without bothering to remove her uniform. Her two roommates weren't there, probably still working the assembly. She was alone. For the first time in 3 years, Arden Miles allowed herself to cry. Not because she'd been rejected, not because the bond had been severed before it could take root, but because for one brief, terrible moment, she'd felt seen, and then she'd been erased all over again. She didn't sleep. How could she? Every time she closed her eyes, she saw Caius Drelor's face, felt the ghost of that bond trying to reform, even though she knew it was impossible. Rejection was final. Absolute. The moon goddess didn't offer second chances. By the time dawn broke, Arden had made a decision. She'd leave the palace, pack what little she owned, find work somewhere else, disappear back into the anonymity she'd worked so hard to build. The lunar assembly would end in 2 days. By the time the court realized she was gone, she'd be halfway across the capital. She was pulling on her boots when someone knocked on the door. Not a servant's knock, soft, tentative. This was sharp, commanding. Arden opened the door and found herself face to face with a palace guard in full armor, the Drelor crest emblazoned on his chest. Her heart stopped. "Arden?" the guard asked. She couldn't speak, could only nod. "You're to come with me, immediately." What? Why?" The guard's expression was carefully neutral. "The Alpha King requests your presence, privately." The world tilted. Caius Drelor wanted to see her, privately. The man who'd rejected her in front of hundreds, who'd severed their bond without hesitation, wanted to speak to her alone. Arden's survival instinct screamed at her to run, to refuse, to slam the door and climb out the window and never look back. But she was a servant in the royal palace, and when the Alpha King summoned you, you didn't say no. "I'll come," she heard herself say. The guard led her through a series of hallways she'd never seen before, deeper into the palace than servants were usually allowed. They passed no other wolves, no other guards, just empty corridors lit by oil lamps that cast long shadows on stone walls. Finally, they stopped in front of a heavy wooden door. "Inside," the guard said, then turned and walked away, leaving Arden alone. She hesitated. Every instinct told her this was a trap, a test, a punishment for something she didn't understand. But curiosity, or maybe something darker, made her push the door open. The room beyond was smaller than she'd expected. A study, maybe, or a private office. Shelves lined with books, a desk covered in maps and correspondence, a fireplace burning low. And standing in front of that fireplace, his back to her, was Caius Draylor. He didn't turn when she entered, didn't acknowledge her presence at all. Arden stood frozen in the doorway, her hands clenched at her sides, her heart hammering so hard she was sure he could hear it. Finally, Caius spoke. "Close the door." She did, the latch clicking into place with a sound that felt too final. "What's your full name?" he asked, still not looking at her. Arden's throat tightened. "Arden Miles." He went perfectly still. The silence stretched so long Arden thought he might not respond at all. But then he turned, and the expression on his face was something she couldn't read. Fury, maybe, or shock, or both. "Miles," he repeated, his voice flat, "of the Eastern Territories." "My family is dead," Arden said quickly. "I'm no one. I have no claim to. I know who you are." Caius crossed the room in 3 strides, stopping close enough that Arden had to tilt her head back to meet his eyes. "I know exactly who you are. The question is, do you?" "I don't understand." "Your family wasn't killed for treason," Caius said, and his voice was low, dangerous. "They were killed because they knew too much. About me. About the throne. About the curse that's been eating away at the Draylor line for 3 generations." Arden's breath caught. "Curse?" Caius's smile was bitter. "Every mate bond the moon goddess forges for me is a death sentence. Not for them. For me. The bond accelerates a poison in my blood, something my grandfather brought back from the Northern Territories and passed down through the line. Complete the bond, and I have 6 months before it kills me." The room spun. "That's why you reject them," Arden whispered. "That's why I reject them," Caius confirmed. "Better to rule alone than die a slow, agonizing death. But you—" He reached out, his hand stopping just short of touching her face. "You're different. I felt it the moment the bond snapped into place. You didn't just accept it. You absorbed it. I don't. Your bloodline carries something rare, a trait that was feared, hunted, nearly bred out of existence. The ability to draw in lethal forces and neutralize them. Your family called it a curse, but it's not. It's a gift. And it's the only thing that might keep me alive." Arden stepped back, shaking her head. "No, I'm nobody. I can't." "You can." Caius's expression hardened. "And you will. Because I'm about to make you an offer, Arden Miles. Marry me, take the crown, play the role of queen. In exchange, I'll restore your family name, give you wealth beyond imagination, and ensure you're protected for the rest of your life." "And the bond?" "We never complete it." Arden stared at him. "You want me to be your queen, but not your mate." Exactly. That's insane. That's survival." Caius leaned closer, his eyes locked on hers. "You've spent 3 years hiding, Arden. 3 years pretending to be invisible. I'm offering you the chance to be seen again, to take back everything that was stolen from you. All you have to do is say yes." Arden's mind raced. This was madness. Marrying an alpha king who didn't want her, taking a crown she had no right to, playing a game she didn't understand. But beneath the fear, something else stirred. Anger. The Miles family had been destroyed, her parents murdered, her name erased. And now this man, this king, was telling her she'd had power all along. Power someone had feared enough to kill for. She thought of the last 15 years. The hiding, the silence, the endless crushing invisibility. And she thought of what it would feel like to stand in front of the court that had erased her and watch them bow. When Arden spoke, her voice was steady. "What do you need me to do?" Caius's smile was sharp as a blade. "Be the queen no one saw coming." The wedding happened 3 days later. 3 days. That was all the time Caius gave the Empire to prepare for the ceremony that would bind him to a woman whose name most of the court didn't even know. 3 days for the seamstresses to create a wedding gown that wouldn't embarrass the throne. 3 days for Arden to transform from invisible servant to the most scrutinized woman in the capital. She spent most of that time locked in rooms she'd only ever cleaned. The queen's suite occupied the entire eastern wing of the palace, a sprawling collection of chambers that hadn't been used since Caius's mother died 12 years ago. Dust covered everything: the furniture, the mirrors, the elaborate tapestries depicting wolf hunts and ancient battles. Arden walked through it all like she was touring a mausoleum, her footsteps echoing on marble floors that had forgotten what it felt like to be walked on. A team of attendants descended on her within hours of Caius's proposal. They scrubbed her skin until it burned, oiled her hair until it shone, dressed her in clothes that cost more than she used to earn in a year. Through it all, Arden stayed silent, watching these women transform her into something she didn't recognize. The sharp angles of her face, once hidden under grime and exhaustion, became elegant. The dark circles under her eyes faded. Even her posture changed. They wouldn't let her hunch, wouldn't let her hide. "Sit straight," snapped Margot, the head attendant, a severe woman in her 50s with iron gray hair. "Queens don't slouch." Arden straightened her spine, feeling the corset dig into her ribs. "I'm not a queen yet. You will be in 3 days. Act like it." But Arden didn't know how to act like a queen. She knew how to survive, how to disappear, how to carry trays without spilling and bow without drawing attention. Being seen, being the center of everything, felt like standing naked in a blizzard. The only person who visited her was Alara. The Queen Mother arrived on the second day, walking into Arden's chambers without knocking, her black dress rustling like dead leaves. She dismissed the attendants with a flick of her wrist and stood studying Arden with those sharp green eyes. "You're younger than I thought," Alara said finally. Arden didn't respond, didn't know what to say. "My son told me about your bargain," Alara continued, moving to the window. "A marriage without a bond, a crown without love. Do you think that will work?" "I don't know," Arden admitted, "but it's what he wants." "What Caius wants and what he needs are rarely the same thing." Alara turned, her expression unreadable. "Tell me, child, why did you agree?" The question hit harder than Arden expected. She could have lied, could have said she wanted the wealth, the protection, the chance to restore her family name. But something about Alara's gaze made lying feel pointless. "Because I'm tired of being invisible," Arden said quietly. "Because they erased my family like we never existed, and I want them to remember, even if it's just for a moment." Alara studied her for a long time. Then, surprisingly, she smiled. It wasn't warm, but it was genuine. "You'll do," she said. "You'll do just fine." The wedding took place in the Grand Cathedral, a massive structure of stone and stained glass that had witnessed every royal marriage for the past 200 years. Arden stood in the anteroom, staring at herself in a floor-length mirror, barely recognizing the woman looking back. The gown was beautiful in a way that felt almost violent. White silk that caught the light like water, embroidered with silver thread in patterns that resembled wolf tracks running up the bodice and sleeves. The neckline was high, modest, but the fit was perfect, tailored to her frame in a way that made her look taller, stronger. Her dark hair had been swept up and woven with small white flowers. Someone had painted her lips red. She looked like a queen. She felt like an imposter. "It's time," Margot said from the doorway. Arden's hands shook. She pressed them against her stomach, trying to steady herself, but the trembling wouldn't stop. In a few minutes, she'd walk down that aisle in front of every ranking wolf in the Empire. The same wolves who'd watched Caius reject her 3 days ago. The same court that had erased her family. What had she been thinking? But it was too late to back out now. The doors opened and music swelled, something old and ceremonial that made Arden's chest tighten. She stepped forward because that was the only direction left. The cathedral was packed. Hundreds of faces turned toward her, their expressions ranging from shock to barely concealed disgust. She heard the whispers even over the music. "That's her? The servant? What is Caius thinking?" Arden kept her eyes forward, focusing on the altar where Caius stood waiting. He wore black. Of course he did. A formal coat with the Draelor crest embroidered in silver across the chest. His expression was carved from stone, giving nothing away. The walk down the aisle felt infinite. Every step echoed. Every breath felt too loud. When she finally reached the altar, Caius extended his hand. Arden took it, and his fingers closed around hers, firm, steady, completely impersonal, like shaking hands with a business partner. The officiator began the ceremony, his words washing over Arden without sticking. She repeated the vows when prompted, heard Caius do the same, and then it was done. A ring slid onto her finger, gold, simple, no stone, practical. "You may kiss the bride," the officiator said. Caius leaned down, and Arden's heart lurched. But the kiss was brief, chaste, barely more than a brush of lips. It meant nothing, conveyed nothing. When he pulled back, his eyes met hers for just a second, and she saw something flash there. Warning, maybe, or apology. Then he turned to face the crowd, and Arden did the same, her hand still in his. "Your king and queen," the officiator announced. The applause was scattered, hesitant. Some wolves bowed, others just stared. Arden forced herself to smile, though it felt like her face might crack. The reception was worse. It took place in the same grand hall where Arden had been publicly rejected 3 days earlier. Now she sat at the high table, Caius on one side, Alara on the other, while the court pretended to celebrate. The food was extravagant. Whole roasted boars, delicacies from every corner of the empire. Wine that cost more per bottle than Arden used to make in a month. She couldn't eat any of it. Her stomach was tied in knots. Around them, alphas and their mates danced, drank, and whispered. Arden felt their eyes on her constantly, dissecting every movement, every expression. She was a curiosity, a scandal, the servant girl who'd somehow climbed into the queen's bed without earning it. "Smile," Caius murmured beside her, not looking at her. "You look like you're at a funeral." "I feel like I'm at one," Arden muttered back. His mouth twitched, almost a smile. "Get used to it. This is your life now." Before Arden could respond, someone approached the table. Lord Varys Keldon, the same drunk alpha who'd demanded wine from her 3 days ago. He bowed, barely, and addressed Caius. "Your Majesty, congratulations on your unexpected union." "Unexpected," Caius repeated, his tone flat. "Is that what we're calling it?" Varys' smile was oily. "Forgive me. I meant no disrespect. I'm simply curious how a servant, forgive me, former servant, caught the attention of a king who's rejected every mate the moon goddess ever offered." The table went silent. Even the musicians seemed to sense the tension, their playing faltering. Caius leaned back in his chair, his expression bored. "Are you questioning my judgment, Lord Keldon?" "Of course not, Your Majesty. I'm simply—" "Because it sounds like you're questioning my judgment." Varys' face went red. "I would never—" "Then I suggest you return to your table and enjoy the wine, unless you'd prefer I find a different use for your tongue." The threat hung in the air, sharp and unmistakable. Varys bowed again, deeper this time, and retreated quickly. Around them conversations resumed, but Arden could feel the shift. The court was testing her, testing them both. "That was unnecessary," she said quietly. "No," Caius replied, finally looking at her. "That was necessary. Show weakness now, and they'll eat you alive." "I'm not weak." "Then prove it." The challenge stung, but Arden swallowed it. She was in over her head, and everyone knew it. The only question was how long she could tread water before she drowned. The next week was a masterclass in humiliation. Caius disappeared almost immediately after the wedding, buried in council meetings and territorial disputes that he made clear didn't concern her. Arden was left to navigate the palace alone, surrounded by wolves who viewed her as either a joke or a threat. The worst were the ladies of the court. They descended on her like vultures, led by Lady Seraphine Hale, a stunning blonde alpha's mate who'd been angling for Caius's attention for years. Seraphine had the kind of beauty that felt weaponized, perfect skin, perfect hair, perfect everything, and she wielded it like a blade. "Your Majesty," Seraphine purred during Arden's first official tea gathering, a forced social event Alara insisted she attend. "You must tell us how you captured the king's heart. We're all dying to know." The other ladies tittered behind their fans. Arden set down her teacup carefully. "I didn't capture anything, Lady Hale. The moon goddess made her choice." "Ah, yes. The bond." Seraphine's smile was sharp. "The bond he rejected in front of the entire court, and yet here you are wearing his ring. Fascinating." "Seraphine," warned an older woman, Lady Cordelia, one of Alara's friends. "I'm simply curious," Seraphine continued, ignoring the warning. "How does one go from serving wine to wearing a crown? Is there a trick to it? Because I'd love to know." The room held its breath. Arden felt heat climb up her neck. Every instinct screamed at her to lower her eyes, to apologize, to make herself small. But Caius's words echoed in her head. "Show weakness now, and they'll eat you alive." She met Seraphine's gaze directly. The trick, Lady Hale, is being chosen by someone who doesn't care what you think. But I understand that might be difficult for you to grasp. Seraphine's smile froze. The other ladies gasped. Arden stood, her chair scraping against the floor. "If you'll excuse me, I have other matters to attend to." She walked out before anyone could respond, her hands shaking so badly she had to clasp them behind her back. She'd just made an enemy, a powerful one, but she'd also drawn a line. That had to count for something. The real education came from Alara. The Queen Mother took Arden under her wing with the efficiency of a general training a soldier. They met every afternoon in Alara's private study, a room lined with books and maps and records dating back centuries. "Ruling isn't about power," Alara explained one afternoon, spreading a map of the empire across her desk. "It's about perception. The court doesn't need to love you. They need to fear disappointing you." "How do I make them fear me?" Arden asked. "I don't have authority. I don't have—" "You have Caius," Alara interrupted. "And you have a name that should have been erased but wasn't. Use both. My family, your family controlled the eastern grain routes. Without those routes, half the empire starves. Your father knew that. He used it as leverage until someone decided he was too dangerous to keep alive." Alara tapped the eastern territories on the map. These lands were seized and distributed among loyalists. But the infrastructure, the mills, the storage facilities, the distribution networks, that knowledge died with your family. Arden's breath caught. "You're saying the empire needs what my family built. I'm saying you have more power than you realize. You just need to learn how to use it." Over the following days, Alara taught her everything: court politics, territorial disputes, which families hated, who owed favors to whom. It was overwhelming, a flood of information Arden struggled to retain. But slowly, patterns emerged. The empire wasn't unified. It was a collection of fractured territories held together by force and fear, with Caius as the only thing keeping it from tearing itself apart. "Why does he need me?" Arden asked one evening. "If he's strong enough to hold the empire together, why bring me into this?" Alara's expression softened, just slightly. "Because strength isn't infinite, child. Even kings break." The words stayed with Arden long after she left Alara's study. She saw Caius in glimpses, at state dinners where he barely acknowledged her, in hallways where he passed without stopping, in council meetings where she wasn't allowed to attend. They were married, bound by law and ceremony, but they might as well have been strangers. Until the night she found him in the throne room. It was late, past midnight. Arden couldn't sleep, her mind too full of everything Alara had taught her, so she wandered the palace halls. Most were empty, guards stationed at intervals but otherwise quiet. She wasn't sure what drew her to the throne room. Curiosity, maybe, or something else. The massive doors were open. Inside, a single figure sat on the obsidian throne, illuminated by moonlight streaming through high windows. Caius. Arden hesitated in the doorway. She should leave, give him privacy. But something about the way he sat there, hunched forward, head in his hands, made her pause. "Are you going to stand there all night, or are you going to come in?" His voice startled her. She hadn't realized he knew she was there. Arden stepped inside, her footsteps echoing. "I didn't mean to intrude." "You're the queen. You can't intrude." He looked up, and even in the dim light, she could see the exhaustion carved into his face. "Can't sleep? Too much on my mind. Welcome to royalty." He gestured to the throne beside his, smaller but no less ornate. "Try it out. See if it fits." Arden crossed the room slowly and sat. The throne was cold, uncomfortable, nothing like she'd imagined. "Disappointing, isn't it?" Caius said, reading her expression. "I thought it would feel different." "They all do." He leaned back, his gaze drifting to the ceiling. "My father used to say the throne is a prison that everyone fights to enter. Took me years to understand what he meant. It was the most personal thing he'd ever said to her." "Do you regret it?" Arden asked quietly. "Taking the crown?" "Every day." His answer was immediate, brutal. But regret doesn't change anything. You take the weight and you carry it, or you let it crush you. There's no middle ground. Silence stretched between them. Arden wanted to ask about the curse, about why he'd really married her, about whether any of this was real or just an elaborate game. But she didn't. Because in that moment, sitting beside him in the dark, she understood something. Caius Drelor wasn't cruel. He was drowning, and he'd pulled her into the water with him. "The court hates me," she said instead. "The court hates everyone. You're just the newest target." "Lady Seraphine wants me dead." That got a small smile out of him. "Seraphine wants everyone dead. Don't take it personally." "How can I not take it personally when she called me a servant in front of— You were a servant." His tone wasn't cruel, just factual. "And now you're a queen. That's going to make people uncomfortable. Let them squirm." Arden studied his profile, the sharp jaw, the permanent crease between his brows, the way his hands gripped the arms of the throne like he was holding on for dear life. "Why did you really choose me?" she asked. Caius turned to look at her, and for the first time she saw something genuine in his expression, something raw. "Because you're the only person who might survive me." Before Arden could respond, he stood abruptly. "Get some sleep. Tomorrow's going to be worse than today." He left without another word, his footsteps echoing into silence. Arden sat alone on the throne, her heart pounding, trying to make sense of what had just happened. 2 weeks into her reign, everything shattered. It started with a council meeting Arden wasn't supposed to attend. Caius had made it clear early on, council business was his domain. She could play queen at social functions, but the real decisions happened behind closed doors. Arden had accepted that, until she overheard Lord Keldon talking to another alpha in the hallway outside the council chambers. "Some Bam. Grain shipments from the east are 3 weeks late, if they don't arrive soon." "They won't arrive," the other alpha interrupted. "The routes are compromised. We should have secured them months ago." "Tell that to His Majesty. See how well that goes." They laughed, bitter and knowing. Arden's mind raced. The eastern grain routes, the infrastructure her family had controlled, the knowledge that had died with them. She knew those routes, had grown up learning them from her father, back when the mile's name meant something. She knew which roads flooded in spring, which passes closed in winter, which villages needed to be bypassed because of bandit activity. Knowledge everyone thought was lost. Without thinking, Arden pushed open the council chamber doors. 20 faces turned toward her, 20 alphas, all male, all powerful, and at the head of the table, Caius, his expression darkening immediately. "The council is in session," he said, his voice cold. "You weren't invited." "The eastern grain routes are failing," Arden said, ignoring the stares. "I know how to fix them." Lord Keldon laughed. "The Queen thinks she knows logistics. How charming." "My father built those routes," Arden shot back, her voice sharper than intended. "I grew up studying them. If you're having problems, it's because you're using the old roads, the ones that wash out every spring. They're alternate routes, but you need to know—" "Enough." Caius's voice cut through the room like a blade. He stood slowly, and the temperature seemed to drop. "Leave. Now." Arden's face burned. Every alpha in the room was staring at her like she'd just committed treason, like she was a child interrupting adults. "I'm trying to help," she said quietly. "I didn't ask for your help." The words hit like a slap. Arden turned and walked out, her vision blurring with humiliation and rage. She heard the council chamber doors slam behind her, heard the muffled laughter of the alphas inside. She'd made a mistake, a huge one. That night, Caius came to her chambers. He didn't knock, just walked in like he owned the place, which, technically, he did. Arden was sitting by the window, still wearing her day clothes, staring out at the Capitol below. "That was stupid," Caius said without preamble. "I know. You embarrassed yourself, and me. I know. Those alphas will use this against you. Against us." "I said I know." Arden spun to face him, her composure finally cracking. "I was trying to help. The eastern routes are failing because no one knows how to maintain them, and I do, and I thought— You thought you could waltz into a council meeting and what? Prove yourself? Show them you're more than a pretty face wearing a crown?" "Yes!" The word burst out of her. "Yes, that's exactly what I thought." "Because I'm tired of being decoration, Caius. I'm tired of smiling at tea parties and pretending I don't hear them calling me a servant behind my back. You told me to be the queen no one saw coming, but how can I do that when you won't let me do anything?" Silence crashed between them. Caius's jaw was tight, his eyes storming, but when he spoke, his voice was quieter. "You're right." Arden blinked. "What?" "About the roots. You're right. We've been using the old roads and they're failing. I've had 3 advisors tell me the same thing, but none of them could offer a solution." He ran a hand through his hair, frustrated. "I didn't let you speak because if I did, the council would have seen it as weakness, me relying on my wife because I can't fix the problem myself. That's ridiculous. That's politics." He moved closer and Arden could see the exhaustion etched into every line of his face. "I need you to understand something. Every decision I make, every word I say, it's being watched, judged, used against me. I can't afford to look weak, not even for a second." "Then why marry me?" Arden demanded. "If you need to appear strong, why tie yourself to someone the court already sees as weakness?" Caius was silent for a long moment. When he finally spoke, his voice was raw. "Because I'm dying, Arden. The curse is accelerating faster than I thought. I have maybe a year, less if I'm unlucky, and I needed someone who could take the crown after I'm gone and not let the empire tear itself apart." The room tilted. "You're dying," Arden repeated, the words hollow. "I'm dying, and you're the only person who might be able to fix what's coming." He turned to leave, but Arden's voice stopped him. "Show me the maps, tomorrow. Let me help with the eastern routes." Caius looked back at her, something unreadable in his expression. "All right." The next morning, they worked together for the first time. Caius spread maps across his private study, pointing out the failed supply lines, the delayed shipments, the villages on the brink of starvation. Arden studied them with the kind of focus she hadn't felt since before her family died, her mind clicking through solutions. "Here," she said, pointing to a mountain pass. "This route bypasses the flooded lowlands. It's longer, but it's stable year-round. My father used it during bad seasons." Caius leaned over the map, his shoulder brushing hers. "The pass is controlled by the Renvold pack. They're not exactly friendly." "Then make them friendly. Offer them a cut of the grain shipments. They'll agree." "You sound certain." "I am. The Renvolds were loyal to my father. They'll remember." Caius studied her for a long moment. Then he nodded. "All right, we'll try it your way." It worked. Within 2 weeks, the grain shipments started flowing again. The council grudgingly admitted the new routes were more efficient. Lord Keldon stopped smirking quite so openly. And for the first time since the wedding, Arden felt like she was actually doing something. But success came with a price. One night, as she returned to her chambers after dinner, she found her door ajar. Inside, her room had been ransacked, clothes scattered, furniture overturned, and painted across her mirror in red. "Servant trash doesn't belong on the throne." Arden stood frozen, staring at the words. Someone had been in her room. Someone had violated her space, left a message designed to terrify. She should have called the guards, should have reported it immediately. Instead, she walked to her wardrobe, pulled out a nightgown, and calmly changed for bed. She cleaned up the mess herself, piece by piece, refusing to let her hands shake. When Caius found her an hour later, summoned by a servant who'd seen the damage, she was sitting on her bed, her expression blank. "Who did this?" His voice was lethal. "I don't know." "Arden," I said, "I don't know." She looked up at him, and her eyes were hard. "But I'll find out. And when I do, I'll handle it." Caius stared at her like he was seeing her for the first time. "You're not afraid." "I'm terrified," Arden corrected. "But being afraid didn't keep me alive for 15 years, so I'll figure this out, just like I've figured out everything else." Something shifted in Caius's expression. Respect, maybe. Or recognition. "All right," he said quietly. "But you don't handle this alone. Understood?" Arden nodded. For the first time since their wedding, they felt like partners. But partnership, Arden was learning, had its own dangers. Because the closer she got to Caius, the harder it became to ignore the bond still humming beneath her skin, incomplete, damaged, but refusing to die. And somewhere in the palace, someone was watching them both, waiting for the perfect moment to strike. The attack came during the winter solstice celebration. Arden had spent the entire week preparing for it. Another grand gathering, another performance where she'd smile and pretend the court didn't hate her. The palace had been transformed into something out of a frost-touched dream. Silver garlands draped from every column, ice sculptures carved into the shapes of wolves, candles by the thousands casting warm light against cold stone. It should have been beautiful. Instead, it felt like walking into a trap. "You're fidgeting," Caius murmured beside her as they stood at the entrance to the grand hall, waiting to be announced. He looked effortlessly regal in black and silver, while Arden felt like she was drowning in her gown, deep blue velvet that weighed 1,000 pounds. "I'm not fidgeting. Your hands are shaking." Arden stilled them immediately, pressing her palms against her sides. "Someone vandalized my chambers 2 weeks ago. Forgive me for being on edge." "I had guards stationed outside your door. No one's getting in again." "Guards didn't stop them the first time." Caius's jaw tightened, but before he could respond, the herald's voice boomed across the hall. "His Majesty, Alpha King Caius Draelor, and Her Majesty, Queen Arden Draelor." The doors swung open. Arden took Caius's offered arm, and they walked in together, descending the grand staircase while hundreds of wolves watched. The applause was louder than at their wedding, more practiced, more polished. But Arden could feel the undercurrent of hostility like electricity before a storm. 3 months. She'd been queen for 3 months, and the court still looked at her like something stuck to their shoe. They took their places at the high table. Alara was already seated, looking resplendent in black silk, her silver hair swept up in an elaborate style. She caught Arden's eye and gave the smallest nod, a gesture of support that Arden desperately needed. The feast began. Courses appeared and disappeared: roasted game, winter vegetables glazed in honey, pastries dusted with powdered sugar. Wine flowed freely. Musicians played from a gallery above. It was excessive, indulgent, everything Arden had learned to despise about palace life. But she played her part, smiled at the right moments, made polite conversation with the alphas and their mates who approached the high table, pretended she couldn't hear the whispers. Halfway through the meal, Lord Varys Keldon stood, raising his goblet. "A toast," he announced, loud enough to silence nearby conversations. "To our king and queen. May their union bring prosperity to the empire." Something about his tone made Arden's skin crawl. Caius raised his own goblet, his expression neutral. "Your concern for the empire is noted, Lord Keldon." "Of course, Your Majesty. We all want what's best for the realm." Varys's smile was oily. "Which is why I must ask, when might we expect an heir?" The hall went silent. Arden's fingers tightened on her goblet. Beside her, she felt Caius go absolutely still. "That," Alara said sharply, "is a matter for the royal family, not public speculation." "Forgive me, Queen Mother. I meant no disrespect." Varys's gaze shifted to Arden. "I simply wonder if Her Majesty understands the importance of securing the succession. After all, queens have duties beyond looking pretty at banquets." The insult landed like a physical blow. Around them, some alphas had the grace to look uncomfortable. Others smirked into their wine. Arden set down her goblet carefully. Her heart was racing, but her voice came out steady. "I understand my duties perfectly, Lord Keldon. Do you understand yours? Or have you been too busy questioning your king's marriage to notice the northern territories are preparing to revolt?" Varys's face went red. "I have no idea what you're—" "The Northbrook Pack has been stockpiling weapons for 6 months. They've doubled their patrols and stopped sending tax revenue to the capital. Either you're incompetent and didn't notice, or you're complicit." Arden leaned forward slightly. "Which is it?" The silence was deafening. Varys sputtered. "This is absurd. Your Majesty, I demand—" "You demand nothing." Caius's voice cut through the hall like a blade. He stood slowly, and every wolf in the room felt it, the weight of his authority, the barely leashed violence. "My queen asked you a question. Answer it." The northern territories are stable." "This is slander." "Stable territories don't stop paying taxes." Caius descended from the high table, and wolves scattered out of his path. "You have 48 hours to provide a full accounting of Northbrook's activities. If what my queen says is true, you'll explain why you failed to report a brewing rebellion. If it's not—" His smile was cold. "Well, then we'll discuss the consequences of making Her Majesty look foolish." He turned and walked out of the hall, the massive doors slamming behind him. The feast dissolved into chaos. Arden sat frozen, her heart hammering. She'd just accused a high-ranking lord of incompetence or treason in front of the entire court. She'd gambled everything on intelligence Alara had shared with her just yesterday, intelligence she wasn't supposed to have. "Well done," Alara murmured beside her, "though you might have warned me you were going to detonate that particular bomb tonight. I didn't plan it. Even better. Spontaneity suits you." But as Arden watched Varys storm from the hall, his face purple with rage, she couldn't shake the feeling that she'd just made a catastrophic mistake. The confrontation with Varys had immediate consequences. Within days, half the council was demanding Arden be barred from receiving any intelligence briefings. The other half was too busy investigating Northbrook to care. Kaya spent hours locked in meetings, emerging only to eat and sleep, and barely that. Arden, meanwhile, became a pariah. The ladies of the court stopped inviting her to gatherings. Servants avoided her in hallways. Even the guards stationed outside her chambers looked uncomfortable, like proximity to her might be contagious. Only Alara remained constant. "Let them sulk," the Queen Mother said during one of their afternoon sessions. "You force them to take you seriously. That's more important than being liked. They hate me. They hated you before. At least now they fear you might be competent." Arden wasn't sure that was better. But the real shock came when Caius summoned her to his private study a week after the winter solstice. She found him bent over maps again, his desk covered in reports and correspondence. He looked worse than usual, dark circles under his eyes, his skin pale, a tightness around his mouth that spoke of pain he was trying to hide. "You were right about Northbrook," he said without looking up. "They've been preparing to break away for months. We're mobilizing troops to the northern border. Will there be war? Depends on whether they're stupid enough to fight." He finally looked at her, and Arden was struck by how exhausted he seemed. "You humiliated Varys. He's demanding I punish you for slander." Arden's stomach dropped. "What are you going to do?" "Nothing. Because you were right, and he was wrong. But this isn't over. Varys has allies, and you just made yourself a target." "I've been a target since I married you." "This is different." Caius moved around the desk, stopping close enough that Arden had to tilt her head back to meet his eyes. "Before, they dismissed you. Now they see you as a threat. That makes you dangerous to keep around. Are you saying I should back down? Let them think—" "I'm saying you need to be smarter. Pick your battles. Stop throwing yourself into fires just to prove you won't burn." The words stung because they were true. Arden had been reckless, desperate to prove she deserved the crown. But desperation made you careless, and carelessness got you killed. "I'll be more careful," she said quietly. Caius studied her for a long moment. Then, unexpectedly, his hand came up to cup her face, gentle, in a way that made Arden's breath catch. "You're doing better than I expected," he said, his voice low. "Better than I probably deserve." "Caius," but he'd already pulled away, the moment breaking as quickly as it had formed. "There's something else. I need you to attend a council meeting tomorrow. I'm officially making you an advisor." Arden blinked. "The council will never accept that. The council doesn't have a choice. You proved you have value. Now I'm going to make them acknowledge it." It should have felt like a victory. Instead, it felt like stepping into a snake pit. The council meeting was exactly as hostile as Arden expected. She sat at the long table in the council chambers, surrounded by 20 alphas who looked at her like she was a disease. Lord Keldon refused to even glance in her direction. Others made their displeasure known through pointed silences and cold shoulders. Caius sat at the head of the table, his expression carved from ice. "We're here to discuss the northern situation," he began. "Northbrook has officially rejected the Empire's authority. They're demanding independence." "Let them have it," growled Lord Theron Blackwood, a grizzled alpha who controlled the western mountains. "We don't need their frozen wasteland." "We need their iron mines," countered another lord. "Without Northbrook's ore, half our weapons production stops." The argument devolved quickly. Alphas shouting over each other, slamming fists on the table, proposing everything from full military invasion to complete withdrawal. Arden listened, trying to track the different factions and their agendas. Then she noticed something. Lord Keldon wasn't participating. He sat in silence, his expression carefully neutral, while everyone else fought. And every few minutes, his eyes would flick toward the door, like he was waiting for something. Arden's instinct screamed warning. She leaned toward Caius, keeping her voice low. Something's wrong. What? Keldon, he's too quiet. The doors burst open. A guard stumbled in, his face sheet white. Your Majesty, we're under attack. The room exploded into chaos. What? Where? How many? Seal the palace. The south gate, the guard gasped. At least 200 wolves. They're already inside the outer walls. Caius was on his feet instantly. Sound the alarm. Mobilize every guard. Secure the royal quarters. And an explosion rocked the palace. The floor shook violently, throwing Arden from her chair. She hit the ground hard, her ears ringing. Around her, the council members were shouting, scrambling, some shifting into wolf form. Dust rained from the ceiling. Another explosion, closer this time. Through the ringing in her ears, Arden heard Caius barking orders. Get the Queen Mother to the safe room. Lock down the palace. Move. Strong hands grabbed her arms, hauling her to her feet. A guard, young, terrified, was trying to pull her toward the door. Your Majesty, we need to evacuate. Where's the king? Arden demanded. He's organizing the defense. Please, we have to... A third explosion blew out the windows. Glass shattered inward. Arden threw her arms up instinctively, felt shards slice through her sleeves. The guard went down, blood streaming from a gash across his face. Through the broken windows, Arden could see smoke rising from the lower palace. Thick, black, choking. This wasn't a raid, this was an invasion. She ran, not away, toward the sounds of fighting, toward the chaos. Her mind was screaming that this was insane, that she should hide, but her feet carried her forward anyway. She had to find Caius, had to find Alara, had to do something besides cower in a corner. The hallways were pandemonium. Servants fled past her, guards rushed toward the fighting, smoke filled the air. Arden's eyes burned, her lungs screamed. She kept running. She found Alara in the royal wing being escorted by 4 guards toward the safe room. The Queen Mother's face was set in grim lines, but her eyes widened when she saw Arden. What are you doing? You should be... I'm not hiding while the palace burns. Arden? Another explosion, so close the walls shook. Alara stumbled and Arden caught her, steadying the older woman. This way, one of the guards shouted. The safe room is... He never finished. An arrow punched through his throat. The guard collapsed, blood spraying. The other 3 drew weapons, forming a protective circle around Alara and Arden. Through the smoke, figures emerged. Wolves in human form, dressed in black, weapons drawn. Rebels, or assassins, or both. Protect the Queen Mother, one of the guards shouted. The attackers rushed forward. Steel clashed. Someone screamed. Arden grabbed Alara's arm and pulled her backward, away from the fighting, but there was nowhere to go. The hallway behind them was blocked by debris from the explosion. They were trapped. One of the guards went down. Then another. The third was barely holding off 2 attackers at once. Within seconds, they'd all be dead. Arden looked around desperately for anything, a weapon, an escape route, anything, and her eyes landed on a decorative tapestry covering the wall. Behind it was a servant's passage. She'd used it dozens of times when she'd worked in the palace. Here! She grabbed the tapestry and yanked it aside, revealing a narrow door. This way! Alara didn't hesitate. The older woman ducked through the opening and Arden followed, slamming the door shut just as one of the attackers lunged. She heard the impact, a body hitting wood, but the door held. For now. The passage was dark, barely wide enough for one person. Arden grabbed Alara's hand and pulled her forward, navigating by memory more than sight. Behind them, she heard the door splinter. They were being followed. Where does this lead? Alara gasped. The kitchens. Then we can get to the safe room from... The passage opened into a small storage room. Arden pulled Alara through, then froze. The room wasn't empty. Lord Varys Keldon stood there, flanked by 3 armed men. He smiled when he saw them. Your Majesty, Queen Mother, how fortuitous. Arden's blood turned to ice. You, Alara breathed, you orchestrated this. I facilitated it, Varys corrected. The Northbrook rebels wanted into the palace. I simply provided the means, in exchange for a few considerations once the dust settles. You're committing treason, Arden said, her voice shaking with rage and fear. I'm ensuring the Empire survives. Caius is dying. Everyone knows it. And when he falls, we need a real leader, not a crippled king and his servant wife. One of the men stepped forward, drawing a blade. Arden moved without thinking. She grabbed a heavy iron pot from a nearby shelf and swung it with everything she had. It connected with the man's skull with a sickening crack. He went down hard. "Run!" Arden shoved Alara toward another passage opening. "Get to the safe room. Tell them about Keldon." Arden, "Go!" Alara ran. The other two men lunged for Arden. She tried to dodge, but one caught her arm, yanking her off balance. She hit the ground hard, felt hands grabbing her, dragging her back. "Don't kill her," Varys ordered. "She's worth more alive. Leverage against Caius." Arden fought, kicking, clawing, screaming, but they were stronger. One of them struck her across the face, and her vision exploded into stars. Then everything went dark. She woke to pain. Her head throbbed. Her face felt swollen. When she tried to move, she realized her hands were bound behind her back, rough rope biting into her wrists. She was in a small room, stone walls, no windows, a single door, some kind of storage cellar maybe. Arden forced herself to sit up, fighting waves of nausea. How long had she been unconscious? Minutes? Hours? The door opened. Varys walked in, looking entirely too pleased with himself. "Good, you're awake. I was worried my men had been too rough." "Where's Alara?" "Safe for now. She made it to the secure wing before my people could intercept her. Pity. Having both of you would have been ideal." Arden's mind raced. If Alara had reached safety, she'd tell Caius about Varys' betrayal. Help would come. She just had to survive until then. "Caius will kill you for this," she said, keeping her voice steady. "Will he? The palace is in flames, half the guard is dead, and Northbrook's forces are pushing toward the throne room as we speak. By morning your husband will either be dead or fleeing for his life." Varys crouched in front of her. "You, however, are valuable. The lords who want Caius gone also want proof his bloodline ends. A rejected mate bond is one thing. A dead queen is another." Horror washed over Arden. "You're going to kill me." "Eventually. First, you're going to write a letter, confessing that you and Caius conspired to weaken the Empire, that your marriage was a sham designed to hide his failing health, give the rebels justification for their coup." "I'll never—" Varys backhanded her across the face. Pain exploded through Arden's skull. She tasted blood. "You will," Varys said calmly, "or I'll find more creative ways to persuade you. I have time." He left, locking the door behind him. Arden sat in the darkness, blood dripping from her split lip, her wrists raw from the ropes. She should have been terrified, should have been crying. Instead, she was furious. Furious at Varys, at the rebels, at every wolf who dismissed her as weak, as worthless, as nothing. She wasn't nothing, and she sure as hell wasn't dying in a cellar. Arden twisted her wrists, feeling the rope bite deeper. Pain flared, but she kept working. The bindings were tight, but not professionally done. Whoever tied them had been in a hurry. She could feel a tiny bit of give. She kept twisting, pulling, ignoring the way the rope cut into her skin, the way blood made her hands slick. One hand slipped free. Arden bit back a gasp of pain, flexing her fingers to restore circulation. Her wrists were shredded, blood dripping onto the stone floor, but she was free. She stood on shaking legs and surveyed the room. No weapons, no obvious escape routes, just stone walls and a locked door. But above the door was a ventilation grate. Arden dragged over a crate, climbed on top, and pried at the grate with bleeding fingers. It was old, rusted. After several minutes of struggle, it came loose with a metallic screech that sounded deafening in the small room. She froze, listening. No footsteps, no shouts. Arden pulled herself up into the vent, her shoulders barely fitting. The space was cramped, filthy, but it led upward, toward fresh air, toward freedom. She crawled. The ventilation system was a maze. Arden lost track of time, navigating by instinct and prayer. Her hands left bloody smears on metal. Her dress caught and tore. Every breath tasted like dust and smoke. Finally, she saw light ahead. The vent opened into a corridor, one she recognized. The East Wing. Still palace territory, but far from the fighting. Arden dropped out of the vent, landed hard, and immediately regretted it. Her ankle screamed protest, probably twisted, maybe sprained. She forced herself to stand anyway. She had to find Caius. Moving through the palace was like navigating a war zone. Bodies littered hallways, guards, servants, rebels. Fires burned unchecked in some wings. The sounds of fighting echoed from multiple directions. Arden stuck to the shadows, limping as quickly as she could manage. Her heart hammered against her ribs. Every corner could hide an enemy. Every shadow could be death. She made it to the throne room. The massive doors were blown open, hanging crooked on broken hinges. Inside, the space that had hosted celebrations and ceremonies was now a battlefield. Overturned furniture, blood on marble floors, and in the center of it all, Caius. He was in wolf form, massive, black-furred, terrifying. He fought against 5 rebels at once, his movements savage and precise. Bodies already lay around him, testament to his lethality. But even from a distance, Arden could see he was struggling. His movements were slower than they should be. He favored his left side. When one rebel got a blade into his shoulder, he didn't react fast enough. The curse. It was weakening him during the worst possible moment. Arden didn't think. She grabbed a fallen sword from a dead guard and ran into the fray. Caius! He turned at her voice, and that split-second distraction nearly cost him. A rebel lunged with a spear. Caius dodged, but not quite far enough. The blade sliced across his ribs, drawing blood. He snarled and tore the rebel's throat out. Arden reached his side just as another attacker charged. She swung the sword with no technique, no training, just desperate survival instinct. The blade connected, opening a gash across the rebel's arm. He screamed and retreated. Caius shifted back to human form, blood streaming from multiple wounds. He grabbed Arden's arm, his grip painfully tight. "What are you doing here? You should be in the safe room." "Varys is a traitor. He's working with the rebels." "I know. Alara told me." "Where?" An explosion rocked the palace. Not fire this time. Worse. The ceiling above them cracked. Caius's eyes widened. He shoved Arden backward with enough force to send her sprawling, then threw himself in the opposite direction. The ceiling collapsed. Stone and timber crashed down in an avalanche of debris, filling the space where they'd just stood. Dust exploded outward in a choking cloud. Arden couldn't see, couldn't breathe, couldn't... When the dust cleared, the throne room was divided by a mountain of rubble. Caius was on one side. Arden was on the other, and standing between them, emerging from the destroyed doorway with a smile sharp as broken glass, was Lord Varys Keldon. "Well," he said, drawing his sword, "isn't this convenient?" Arden scrambled to her feet, raising her own blade with shaking hands. Her ankles screamed, her vision swam. She had no training, no strength, no chance. But Caius was trapped on the other side of the rubble, and Varys was advancing. "Come on then, your majesty," Varys taunted. "Show me what a servant girl can do." Arden gripped the sword tighter and prepared to fight for her life. Arden had never held a sword before tonight. The weight of it felt all wrong in her hands. Too heavy, the balance off, the grip slippery with blood from her torn wrists. Varys circled her like a predator, toying with wounded prey, his own blade gleaming in the firelight that flickered through the destroyed throne room. Behind the mountain of rubble, she could hear Caius fighting to get through, the scrape of stone, his ragged breathing, the frustrated snarls of a wolf who couldn't reach her. "Drop the sword," Varys said, almost conversational. "Make this easy." "Go to hell!" He lunged. Arden barely got her blade up in time. Steel clashed against steel with a sound that rattled her teeth. The impact sent shockwaves up her arms, nearly knocking the sword from her grip. Varys pressed his advantage, driving her backward with a series of strikes that she blocked more through panic than skill. Her ankle gave out. Arden hit the ground hard, her sword skittering across blood-slicked marble. Varys kicked it away and pressed the tip of his blade to her throat. "Disappointing," he said. "I expected more fight from the girl who humiliated me in front of the court." Arden's mind raced. She couldn't overpower him. He was twice her size, trained in combat, and she was barely conscious. But Varys had one weakness, his arrogance. He wanted to gloat, to savor this. She just needed to buy time. "You won't get away with this," she gasped. "Even if you kill us both, the Empire won't follow you." "They'll follow whoever holds power, and once Caius is dead, I'll have it." He leaned down, his breath hot against her face. "Starting with ending the bloodline that's poisoned this throne for 3 generations." The blade pressed harder. Arden felt it break skin. Then something inside her shifted. It started as heat, a pulse of energy that bloomed in her chest and spread outward like wildfire through her veins. The incomplete mate bond, the one Caius had rejected, suddenly roared to life. Not gentle, not romantic. It was violent, desperate, a connection trying to complete itself in the face of death. And beneath it, something else stirred. Something that had been dormant her entire life. The ability her family had feared. The curse that wasn't a curse at all. Arden could feel Varys's intent, the malice, the killing edge of it, like a tangible force pressing against her skin. And before she understood what she was doing, her body reacted. She grabbed his wrist, the one holding the blade, and pulled. Not physically. Something deeper. The malice flowed into her like poison being drawn from a wound. Varys's eyes went wide. His blade clattered to the floor. He staggered backward, gasping. What did you... Arden didn't know. She was drowning in foreign emotions, rage and ambition and fear, all of it Varys's, all of it flooding through her system like acid. It burned. Her vision went white. Every nerve screamed, but she didn't let go. Arden, Caius's voice, raw and desperate, cut through the pain. Don't! It'll kill you! She couldn't answer, couldn't think. The power was too much, too overwhelming. She was absorbing everything Varys was throwing at her, his violence, his hatred, and it was tearing her apart from the inside. Then she felt Caius. Not just his presence, the bond between them, damaged and incomplete, suddenly snapped fully into place. The connection hit like lightning, his strength flooding through her, stabilizing the chaos. His wolf recognizing hers even though she'd never shifted, never known her animal form. The power stopped burning, started transforming. Arden's eyes snapped open. She looked down at her hands and saw them glowing, soft silver light that pulsed with each heartbeat. The malice she'd pulled from Varys was still there, but neutralized. Harmless. She'd done it. Actually done it. Absorbed something lethal and made it powerless. Varys stumbled backward, his face sheet white. Impossible. The Miles line was, "You can't." "She can." Caius's voice came from above. Arden looked up to see him standing atop the rubble, covered in blood and dust, his eyes blazing silver. He'd shifted again. Not fully wolf, but something between, claws extended, fangs visible, barely contained violence. He jumped down, landing between Arden and Varys with predatory grace. "You made a mistake," Caius said, his voice barely human. "You threatened what's mine." Varys tried to run. He made it 3 steps before Caius was on him. There was no honor in what followed. No ceremony, no mercy. Just brutal, efficient execution. When it was over, Varys Keldon lay in a spreading pool of his own blood, his eyes staring at nothing. Caius turned back to Arden, his expression shifting from lethal to concerned in an instant. "Are you hurt?" Arden tried to stand and immediately collapsed. Her legs wouldn't hold her. The power she'd channeled had burned through every reserve she had. I can't." Caius caught her before she hit the ground, pulling her against his chest. His heart hammered against her ear, rapid and uneven. "What the hell were you thinking? That power could have killed you." Seemed better than the alternative. "Arden, is it done?" She pulled back enough to look at his face. "The attack. Is it over?" "Not yet. The rebels control half the palace." He set her down carefully against a section of intact wall. "But with Varys dead, they've lost their inside contact. We can push them back. I need to..." The bond. Arden grabbed his wrist, her fingers trembling. "I felt it complete. When I was dying, it just..." Caius went very still. "I felt it too." For a long moment they stared at each other. The completed bond hummed between them, alive and demanding. Arden could feel Caius's emotions now. The fear he'd felt when she was in danger, the relief flooding through him, the carefully controlled panic at what completing the bond meant. The curse would accelerate. He'd have months at best. "We'll deal with it later," Caius said finally, his voice rough. "Right now, I need you to get to the safe room. Can you walk?" "No." "Then I'll carry you." "Caius." Arden grabbed his face, forcing him to look at her. "I absorbed Varys's intent to kill, his malice, and it didn't destroy me. What if..." She took a shaky breath. "What if I can do the same with the curse?" His expression shuddered immediately. "Absolutely not. We don't even know if..." We know it's killing you. We know my bloodline can neutralize lethal forces, and we know the bond is complete whether we want it to be or not. Her hands were still glowing faintly, silver light pulsing beneath her skin. Let me try. If you're wrong, it'll kill us both. If I'm right, it saves us both. Caius looked at her like she was the most terrifying thing he'd ever seen, which, given what she'd just done to Varys, might be accurate. Not here, he said finally. Not now. We end this rebellion first, then... He paused, something shifting in his expression. Then we try it your way. Before Arden could respond, footsteps echoed through the ruined throne room, both of them tensed, Caius moving to shield her body with his. But it wasn't rebels who emerged from the smoke. It was Alara, flanked by a dozen palace guards and looking absolutely furious. Her pristine black dress was torn and bloody. Her silver hair had come loose from its elaborate style, and she held a sword that was clearly not decorative. There you are, the Queen Mother snapped. I've been searching for 20 minutes. Do you have any idea how... She stopped, taking in the scene. Varys's body. The destroyed throne room. Arden collapsed against the wall, glowing faintly. What happened? Varys is dead, Caius said flatly, and the bond is complete. Alara's eyes widened fractionally. Then she sheathed her sword and crossed to Arden, kneeling to examine her. You foolish, brilliant girl. You actually did it. Did what? Arden managed. Activated your birthright. The ability that got your family killed. Alara's expression was unreadable. How much did you absorb? I don't know. His intent to kill? Maybe more. It's hard to... She needs rest, Caius interrupted. And medical attention. We all do. What's the situation in the rest of the palace? Alara stood, her tactical mind clearly reasserting itself. The rebels are falling back. Without Varys coordinating them, they're disorganized. But we've lost over 100 guards and twice that in servants. The South Wing is completely destroyed. It'll take months to rebuild. Acceptable losses, Caius said, though his voice was hollow. The council is demanding answers. They want to know how rebels got inside, who helped them, why. Tell them the truth. Lord Varys Keldon committed treason and paid the price. Caius's tone left no room for argument. Anyone who questions that can join him. Alara studied her son for a long moment, then she nodded. As you command, Your Majesty. The next hours passed in a blur. Guards carried Arden to the medical wing, where healers descended on her injuries. The gash on her throat was superficial but had bled dramatically. Her wrists needed stitching. Her ankle was definitely sprained. But the worst damage was internal. Whatever she'd done when she absorbed Varys's malice had burned through her system like wildfire. You need rest, the head healer said, an elderly wolf named Meryn who'd served the palace for 40 years. Complete bed rest. No stress, no excitement, no... How's the king? Arden interrupted. Meryn's expression tightened. Being stubborn. Refusing treatment until he secured the palace. That sounds like him. Your Majesty, I must insist. I'll rest when he does. Arden pushed herself upright, ignoring the way her vision swam. Where is he now? The council chambers, but Arden was already moving. The walk to the council chambers took forever. Every step sent pain shooting up her bad ankle. Servants and guards stared as she passed. The queen, disheveled and bloody, limping through palace halls like a ghost. But no one tried to stop her. She pushed open the council chamber doors without knocking. Inside, Caius stood at the head of the table, facing down the remaining council members. He looked like death warmed over, covered in blood, favoring his injured side, his face gray with exhaustion, but his voice was steady as steel. Will be executed at dawn. Any family found to have harbored rebels will lose their lands and titles. This rebellion ends tonight. Your Majesty, Lord Blackwood protested, surely some leniency. There is no leniency for treason. Caius's eyes swept the room, and several alphas flinched. You all sat in this chamber 3 hours ago while rebels stormed the palace. Some of you knew, some of you helped. I haven't decided which of you falls into which category yet, but when I do, those responsible will join Varys. Silence. Absolute, terrified silence. Then someone noticed Arden standing in the doorway. The Queen, someone whispered. All eyes turned to her. Arden fought the urge to run, to hide, to make herself invisible again. Instead, she walked into the room and took her seat at the table, the one Caius had given her when he made her an advisor. "Her Majesty should be resting," one of the lords said weakly. "Her Majesty," Arden replied, her voice stronger than she felt, "just killed the man who orchestrated this coup. I'll rest when the Empire is secure." The council members exchanged glances. Some looked skeptical. Others looked afraid. Good. They should be afraid. Caius's hand found hers under the table, his fingers lacing through hers. The touch was brief, but the completed bond thrummed between them, a reminder of what they'd both risked tonight. "The Queen speaks truth," Caius said. "Varys fell by her hand. She has earned her place at this table more than any of you." That changed things. Arden could see it in their faces, the shift from dismissal to wary respect. She wasn't just a servant wearing a crown anymore. She was a threat, a real one. The meeting continued for another hour, plans being made to root out the remaining rebels and secure the palace. Arden contributed where she could, drawing on knowledge from Alara's lessons and her own instincts. By the time the council finally adjourned, dawn was breaking through the windows. They'd survived the night, barely. Caius dismissed everyone except Alara. The three of them sat in the empty chamber, exhausted beyond words. "We have a problem," Alara said without preamble. "The bond is complete. The curse will accelerate, unless—" She looked at Arden. "Can you really do it? Absorb the poison from his bloodline?" "I don't know," Arden admitted, "but I have to try. If you fail, then we both die." Arden met Caius's eyes across the table. "But we're dying anyway, aren't we? At least this way, there's a chance." Caius was silent for a long time. Then he nodded. "Not here. Not in the palace." He stood, wincing at the movement. "There's a place. The old Drelor estate, 3 days north. It's isolated, protected. If this goes wrong, the explosion won't take the capital with it." "Explosion?" Arden's voice climbed. "The curse is poison, but it's also power. When it kills, it doesn't go quietly." Caius's expression was grim. "My grandfather died and took half a village with him. If you try to absorb it and can't contain it, then we make sure no one else gets hurt." Arden stood as well, her legs shaking but holding. "When do we leave?" "As soon as the palace is secured. 2 days? Maybe 3? Alara rose, moving to clasp both their hands. "This is insanity." "This is survival," Caius corrected. "We're good at that." The Queen Mother's eyes glistened, but she didn't cry. Instead, she pulled them both into an embrace that spoke of all the words she couldn't say. When she pulled back, her expression was composed again. "Then we prepare, and we pray the moon goddess knows what she's doing." The next 2 days were chaos of a different kind. The rebellion's collapse left a power vacuum. Lords who'd been quietly neutral suddenly scrambled to prove their loyalty. Families with even distant ties to Varys tried to distance themselves. The council met constantly, reorganizing territories and redistributing seized lands. Through it all, Arden worked alongside Caius. She sat in on meetings, offered strategies, made decisions that affected thousands of lives. The council members still bristled, still resented her presence. But they listened. Because she'd killed a traitor with her bare hands, and that kind of violence earned respect in wolf politics. The court was different too. Ladies who'd sneered at her now bowed. Servants who'd avoided her sought her favor. Even Seraphine Hale approached her after a state dinner, her expression carefully neutral. "Your Majesty, I owe you an apology." Arden studied the beautiful blonde, looking for the trap. "For what?" "For underestimating you. I thought—" Seraphine hesitated. "I thought you were another ambitious girl using the king. I was wrong." "Yes, you were. For what it's worth, you're a better queen than I would have been." Seraphine's smile was genuine, if brittle. "Try not to die doing whatever insane thing you're planning." She walked away before Arden could respond. That night, Arden found Caius in his private study, surrounded by maps and reports as usual, but he wasn't working. He was just sitting there, staring at nothing. "We leave tomorrow," he said without looking up. "Everything's arranged." Arden closed the door behind her and crossed to his desk. "Are you afraid?" Terrified. His honesty was startling. "I've spent 13 years convinced I'd die alone, that the curse would take me and there was nothing anyone could do to stop it. And now you're telling me there might be a way out. And I... He looked up, and his eyes were raw. I want to believe you. But if I let myself hope and you're wrong... Arden moved around the desk and pulled him to his feet. The bond between them sang, complete, undeniable, demanding. She could feel his fear like it was her own, his desperate hope, his bone-deep exhaustion. Then we'll die together, she said quietly. But we'll die fighting. That's better than the alternative. Caius cupped her face with both hands, his touch gentle despite the violence those same hands had committed. How did you get so brave? I learned from the best. He kissed her. Not the chaste, meaningless brush of lips at their wedding. This was real, desperate and consuming and honest. The bond flared between them, silver light spilling across the room. Arden felt everything, his need, his fear, his carefully guarded love. When they broke apart, both were breathing hard. Whatever happens tomorrow, Caius said, his forehead pressed against hers. Thank you. For seeing me. For not running when you had the chance. Where would I run? Arden managed a shaky smile. I'm the queen. I have responsibilities. That surprised a laugh out of him, brief and genuine. They spent the rest of the night together. Not making love, though the bond pulled at them. Just sitting in silence, hands intertwined, preparing for what came next. At dawn, they rode north. The journey to the old Draylor estate took 3 days, just as Caius predicted. They traveled with minimal guard, just Alara and a handful of trusted soldiers. The rest stayed behind to maintain order in the capital. Arden had never been outside the capital before. The landscape amazed her. Rolling hills that gave way to dense forest, small villages where wolves lived simple lives far from court politics. It was beautiful in a way the palace never could be. My grandfather built the estate as a retreat, Caius explained as they rode. Somewhere the family could go when court life became too much. It's been abandoned for decades. Because of the curse? Because watching family members die there kind of ruins the ambiance. His dark humor surprised a laugh out of Arden. The soldiers looked uncomfortable, their king joking about death, but Alara smiled slightly. They reached the estate at sunset on the 3rd day. It was smaller than Arden expected, a manor house rather than a palace, built from gray stone and surrounded by overgrown gardens. Beautiful once, but clearly neglected. Windows were dark, vines crawled up walls. It looked haunted. Home sweet home, Caius muttered. They spent the evening preparing. The guards cleared rooms, started fires, made the place habitable. Alara prepared herbs and medicines, not that any of it would help if this went wrong, but it made her feel useful. Arden stood in what had once been a garden, watching the sun set through bare trees. Her hands were shaking. She'd been confident back in the palace, fueled by adrenaline and desperation. But now, facing the reality of what she was about to attempt. Second thoughts? She turned to find Caius standing behind her, his expression unreadable. Thousands of them, Arden admitted, but I'm doing it anyway. Why? Because I love you. The words hung in the air between them. Arden hadn't planned to say them, didn't even know she felt them until they were out. But they were true. Somewhere between hating him, fearing him, and fighting beside him, she'd fallen completely. Caius closed the distance between them, his eyes blazing. Say it again. I love you, even though you're impossible and stubborn, and you rejected me in front of the entire court, and... He kissed her silent. The bond erupted between them, silver light spilling into the darkening garden. When they broke apart, Caius was smiling, really smiling, for the first time since she'd known him. I love you too, he said, in case the completed mate bond didn't make that obvious. Arden laughed, the sound shaky but genuine. When this is over, we're taking a vacation, somewhere far from the capital, just us. That sounds perfect. They stood together in the garden until stars appeared overhead. Tomorrow, they'd face the curse. Tomorrow, they'd either survive or die together. But tonight, for the first time in both their lives, they weren't alone. And that made all the difference. Dawn came too quickly. Arden woke in an unfamiliar bed, wrapped in Caius's arms, his breathing steady against her hair. For a moment, she let herself pretend this was normal, that they were just a married couple waking up together, nothing more complicated than that. Then she felt the bond pulse between them, and reality crashed back. Today, she'd either save his life or kill them both. "You're awake," Caius murmured against her neck. "Can't sleep." "Neither can I." He pulled back enough to look at her, his gray eyes serious. "We don't have to do this. We could go back to the capital, let the curse run its course. You'd survive, inherit the throne." "Stop." Arden pressed her fingers to his lips. "We're doing this. I'm not losing you now." Something in his expression cracked. Relief or fear, maybe both. He kissed her palm, then sat up, the blankets falling away. In the morning light, she could see the damage the curse had already done. His skin had a grayish tinge. Veins stood out too prominently along his arms. When he moved like it hurt. They'd waited too long already. Alara was waiting downstairs, the main room transformed into something between a medical bay and a ritual space. She'd cleared away the dust-covered furniture, laid out herbs and medicines Arden didn't recognize, and drawn symbols on the floor in what looked like salt. "I don't know if any of this will help," Alara admitted, her voice tight. "The records from your family's line were destroyed. I'm working from fragments and guesswork. It's more than we had yesterday." Arden studied the symbols. They looked old, primal. "What do I do?" "The curse is anchored to his bloodline, his heart specifically. You'll need to establish a direct connection, then draw it out the same way you pulled the malice from Varys." Alara's hands shook slightly as she arranged vials of dark liquid on a nearby table. "But this is different. The curse has been in the Draylor line for 3 generations. It's not just poison anymore, it's woven into his very essence. Pulling it out might kill him anyway," Caius finished. He stood in the doorway, dressed in simple clothes, looking more human than Arden had ever seen him, vulnerable. "We know the risks." Alara's composure finally cracked. She crossed to her son and pulled him into an embrace that spoke of all the years she'd watched him suffer, all the mates she'd seen him reject to stay alive, all the nights she'd wondered if tomorrow would be the day she lost him. "I love you," she whispered. "Whatever happens, know that." "I know, Mother." Caius held her tight. "I've always known." When they separated, Alara's eyes were dry, but her voice was rough. "Then let's begin." Caius lay down in the center of the salt circle, his shirt removed to expose the network of dark veins spreading across his chest like cracks in porcelain. They all converged on his heart, the epicenter of the curse. Arden knelt beside him, her hands hovering over his chest. "I can feel it. Even without touching you, I can feel it." "That's the bond," Alara explained, standing just outside the circle. "It connects you to everything he is, including the poison. When you're ready, place your hands over his heart and open yourself to it. Let it flow into you. And then? Then you survive it. Or you don't. Helpful." Arden looked at Caius. He was watching her with an expression she couldn't quite read. Trust, maybe. Or resignation. "Last chance to run," he said. "Not a chance." She placed her hands on his chest. The curse hit her like a tidal wave. It wasn't like absorbing Varys's malice. That had been sharp, violent, focused. This was vast and ancient, a poison that had been festering for decades. It poured into her through the bond, agony and decay, power corrupted into something lethal. Arden gasped, her back arching. "Arden!" Caius tried to sit up, but Alara held him down. "She has to do this. Don't break her concentration." Arden couldn't have broken concentration if she tried. The curse was all-consuming, flooding her system faster than she could process. She could feel it trying to take root in her own heart, could feel the poison reaching for purchase in her bloodline. But her bloodline fought back. The ability that had gotten her family killed, that had been feared and hunted for generations, suddenly roared to life. Arden's hands began to glow, silver light spreading across Caius's chest. The curse recoiled, recognizing a threat. Then it attacked. Pain exploded through every nerve. Arden screamed, her vision going white. Distantly, she heard Alara shouting, heard Caius struggling against restraints he hadn't had a moment ago. But she couldn't stop. If she stopped now, the curse would kill them both. So she pulled harder. The poison came reluctantly, fighting every inch. Arden could feel it tearing free from Caius's bloodline, feel the damage it caused on the way out. His heart stuttered, stopped, started again. "He's dying!" Alara's voice, desperate. Arden, I know. Arden sobbed, her hands pressed so hard against his chest. She felt ribs shift. I'm trying. The curse surged, a last desperate attempt to keep its host. Dark energy exploded outward. The salt circle shattered. Arden flew backward, hitting the wall hard enough to crack plaster. For a moment, everything was silent. Then Caius gasped, a huge, shuddering breath like a drowning man breaking the surface. Arden dragged herself upright, her whole body shaking. Alara was bent over Caius, checking his pulse, his breathing, her hands moving with practiced efficiency. Is he... Arden couldn't finish the question. Alive. Alara's voice cracked. His heart is steady, the veins, they're clearing, it's actually working. But Arden barely heard her. The curse was still inside her, writhing like a living thing. She'd pulled it from Caius, but she hadn't neutralized it yet. It was poisoning her now, burning through her system. She looked down at her hands. They were still glowing, but the light was flickering, unstable. Arden? Caius struggled to sit up, his eyes widening when he saw her. What's wrong? The curse, it's... She couldn't breathe properly. The room spun. I can't hold it. There's too much. Alara crossed to her immediately, gripping her shoulders. Yes, you can. Your bloodline was made for this. You just need to transform it. I don't know how. You do. You already did it with Varys. The malice he threw at you, you didn't just absorb it. You changed it, made it harmless. Alara's voice was fierce, commanding. Do the same now. Take the poison and make it power. I can't. You can. You're a Miles. This is your birthright. Something in those words struck home. Arden closed her eyes, focusing inward. The curse was there, massive and terrible, trying to destroy her from the inside out. But underneath it, she could feel her own power, the ability that had terrified her family, that they'd tried to hide, to suppress. She stopped fighting it. Instead, she embraced it. The shift was instantaneous. The poison stopped burning and started transforming, dark energy becoming silver light, corruption becoming power. Arden felt it spreading through her system, felt her body adapting, changing at a fundamental level. When she opened her eyes, the room was bathed in silver. She looked at her hands. They weren't just glowing anymore. They were radiant, pulsing with energy that felt both foreign and intrinsically hers. The curse was still there, but it wasn't poison anymore. It was just power. Raw, untamed, but hers to control. Impossible, Alara breathed. You actually did it. Arden stood on shaking legs, the power settling into her bones. Is it gone? From Caius? Come see for yourself. Caius was sitting up now, looking more alive than Arden had ever seen him. The gray tinge to his skin was gone. The dark veins had vanished. When he met her eyes, his were clear. No pain, no death sentence lurking behind them. How do you feel? Arden asked. Like I've been drowning for 13 years and just remembered how to breathe. He stood, crossing to her in 3 strides. His hands cupped her face, tilting it up to meet his gaze. You saved my life. We saved each other. He kissed her, and the bond between them sang, complete, healed, no longer tainted by approaching death. The power Arden had absorbed flared, silver light spilling across the room. When they broke apart, Alara was wiping her eyes. What happens now? Arden asked, looking at the older woman. Now, Alara said, her voice thick with emotion, you go home, and you show the Empire what a real queen looks like. The journey back to the capital took 4 days instead of 3. Caius insisted on taking it slow, giving Arden time to adjust to the power now coursing through her veins. She spent hours each day learning to control it, practicing drawing in energy and releasing it in controlled bursts. By the time the capital's walls came into view, she could make her hands glow on command and occasionally levitate small objects when she concentrated. I feel ridiculous, she told Caius as they rode through the city gates, like a carnival trick. You absorbed a 3-generation curse and lived. You're allowed to feel a little powerful. The palace was chaos when they arrived. Word had spread that the king and queen had left in secret, and rumors ranged from romantic getaway to desperate flight. When they walked into the grand hall together, both alive, both whole, the court erupted. Your Majesty! Lord Blackwood hurried forward, relief written across his weathered face. We were told you were ill, that you'd gone north to... He stopped, staring at Caius. You look different. I'm healed, Caius's voice carried across the hall, silencing whispers. The curse that has plagued the Drelor line for 3 generations is broken, thanks to my queen. Every eye turned to Arden. She stood there in traveling clothes, her hair windblown, probably covered in road dust. Not exactly regal. But when she met their stares, she didn't look away, didn't make herself small. The ability my family was killed for, Arden said, her voice steady, wasn't a curse, it was a gift, one that saved your king's life. I hope that puts to rest any questions about whether I deserve to stand beside him. Silence. Then, slowly, Lord Blackwood dropped to one knee. Long live the Queen, he said. Others followed. One by one, the lords and ladies of the court knelt, their voices joining in a chorus that echoed through the hall. Long live the Queen. Arden felt tears prick her eyes but blinked them back. She'd spent 15 years invisible. It would take more than one dramatic moment to make her comfortable with this. But when Caius took her hand and squeezed, she squeezed back. They'd survived. Together. That was enough. The following weeks transformed the Empire. With the curse broken and the rebellion crushed, Caius threw himself into restructuring the government. Lords who'd proven disloyal lost their positions. New blood, younger wolves with fresh ideas, filled the council. And for the first time in Drelor history, the Queen had an official voice in policy. Arden took to it like she'd been born for it. She reopened the eastern grain routes using her family's old knowledge, preventing a famine that would have killed thousands. She established trade agreements with neighboring territories that had been hostile for decades. She even convinced Caius to institute reforms protecting lone wolves, the outcasts who'd once included her. You're making me look bad, Caius complained one evening, reading through her latest proposal. The Queen who does everything. Meanwhile, I just sit here looking intimidating. You're very good at looking intimidating. It's a gift. They were in their private chambers, quarters they actually shared now, the pretense of separate rooms abandoned. Arden sat by the window, working through correspondence, while Caius reviewed reports. Domestic, normal. It still felt surreal. There's something I need to tell you, Arden said, setting down her pen. Caius looked up, immediately alert. What's wrong? Nothing's wrong. It's just, I've been talking to Alara about my family, about what really happened to them. She took a breath. They weren't killed just because of our bloodline's ability. They were killed because they discovered something. Evidence that the curse wasn't natural, that it was deliberately inflicted on your grandfather by someone who wanted to weaken the Drelor line. Caius went very still. Who? We don't know yet, but my father had been investigating. That's why he was branded a traitor, to silence him before he could expose whoever was responsible. Arden met his eyes. I want to finish what he started. Find out who cursed your family and make them pay. That could take years, and it would make powerful enemies. I know. Caius studied her for a long moment. Then he crossed the room and pulled her to her feet, his arms wrapping around her waist. Then we do it together, he said, like everything else. Arden leaned into him, feeling the steady beat of his heart against her cheek. Alive. Healthy. Here. Together, she agreed. 3 months after they returned to the capital, Alara threw a celebration. Officially, it was to mark the winter solstice, a replacement for the disastrous gathering that had ended in rebellion. Unofficially, it was to show the Empire that the crown was stable, powerful, and not going anywhere. Arden stood in front of her mirror, studying her reflection. The woman looking back bore little resemblance to the servant girl who'd spilled wine 3 months ago. This woman wore a gown of deep silver that complemented her dark hair and pale skin. A crown, smaller than Caius's, but no less meaningful, rested on her head. She looked like a queen. She felt like an imposter. Stop fidgeting, Alara said from the doorway. She entered the room carrying a small wooden box. You look beautiful. I look like I'm playing dress-up. You look like what you are, a woman who defied impossible odds and won. Alara opened the box, revealing a necklace Arden had never seen before. Silver chain, pendant shaped like a wolf mid-leap. This belonged to your mother. I had it saved when your family's estate was seized. Arden's breath caught. You knew my mother? We were friends before politics made that impossible. Alara's expression was soft with memory. She would be so proud of you. They both would. Tears burned Arden's eyes, but she blinked them back as Alara fastened the necklace around her throat. The pendant settled against her collarbone, warm despite being metal. "Thank you," Arden whispered. "Thank you," Alara corrected, "for saving my son, for being brave enough to try when everyone else would have given up." The celebration was everything the previous gathering hadn't been: joyful, genuine, absent the undercurrent of threat. Arden moved through it with chaos at her side, accepting congratulations and well wishes from wolves who'd once sneered at her. Lady Seraphine approached halfway through the evening, looking elegant in ice blue. "Your Majesty, you look radiant." "Thank you, Lady Hale." "I have a confession." Seraphine's smile turned rueful. "I spent years trying to catch the king's attention. I thought if I was beautiful enough, charming enough, perfect enough, he'd choose me." She glanced at Caius, who was deep in conversation with Lord Blackwood. "I was furious when he chose you. A servant, someone who didn't fit the mold." Arden waited, unsure where this was going. "But you didn't save him by being perfect," Seraphine continued. "You saved him by being real, by having the courage to risk everything when everyone else, including me, would have played it safe." She extended her hand. "I judged you unfairly. I'm sorry." Arden shook her hand, surprised by the genuine warmth in Seraphine's grip. Apology accepted. As Seraphine walked away, Caius appeared at Arden's elbow. "Did Seraphine Hale just apologize to you?" "Stranger things have happened." "Name one," Arden laughed. "A servant married a king and broke a 3-generation curse. How's that?" "Fair point." He offered his hand. "Dance with me?" They took to the floor as musicians struck up a waltz. Arden had never learned formal dancing, had watched from the sidelines while serving wine at gatherings like this. But Caius led her through it patiently, and the bond between them made it easy to anticipate his movements. "Have I told you lately that you're amazing?" Caius murmured as they spun across the floor. "Not in the last hour." "Unacceptable. You're amazing, brilliant, the best decision I ever made. You rejected me in front of the entire court. Second best decision. Marrying you was the first." Arden rolled her eyes, but she was smiling. "You're ridiculous. You love me anyway." "Unfortunately, yes." They danced until the music ended, then slipped away from the celebration, escaping to the palace gardens. The night air was cold but refreshing after the crowded hall. Stars overhead. Peace. "Do you ever regret it?" Caius asked, pulling Arden close. "Everything you gave up. The quiet life you could have had." "I gave up invisibility and poverty. I gained you and a throne." Arden looked up at him. "No, I don't regret it. Even though the court still whispers, even though some of them will never fully accept you." "Let them whisper. I'm not here for their acceptance." She touched his face, feeling the familiar thrum of the bond between them. "I'm here because I choose to be. Because you choose me. That's enough." Caius kissed her, soft and sweet, the kind of kiss that promised forever. When they broke apart, Arden noticed silver light playing across her fingertips, the power she'd absorbed, responding to her emotions. She'd learned to control it mostly, but it still flared sometimes when she felt strongly about something. "Show off," Caius teased. Arden laughed and let the light fade. "Come on, we should get back before Alara sends guards to find us." They walked back toward the palace hand in hand, leaving footprints in frost-covered grass. Behind them, the celebration continued, music and laughter echoing into the night. But here, in the quiet of the gardens, it was just them. The king who'd been dying, and the servant girl who'd saved him, the rejected bond that became unbreakable, from invisible to unstoppable, from servant to queen, and every impossible step in between. 6 months later, Arden stood in the council chambers presenting evidence that the curse inflicted on the Draylor line had originated with the Keldon family, Varys's grandfather specifically, in revenge for a territorial dispute 3 generations ago. The revelation shook the empire. The Keldon lands were seized, their remaining family members exiled. Lords who'd once questioned Arden's right to rule now looked at her with something approaching awe. She'd not only saved the king, She'd exposed a conspiracy that had nearly destroyed the throne. That evening, Caius found her on the balcony overlooking the capital, lost in thought. "Regrets?" he asked, joining her. "About exposing the Keldons?" "No, they deserved worse." "About everything else?" Arden considered the question seriously. The past 6 months had been brutal. Political maneuvering, assassination attempts, constant scrutiny. She'd gained power but lost privacy. Earned respect but made enemies. "No regrets," she said finally. "This life is hard, but it's mine. I chose it." "We chose it," Caius corrected, taking her hand. "Together." Below them, the capital sprawled, hundreds of thousands of wolves living their lives, unaware that the queen watching over them had once scrubbed their floors and poured their wine, that she'd been invisible, dismissed, erased. Not anymore. Now when Arden Miles walked into a room, people noticed. When she spoke, they listened. She'd taken the power that was meant to destroy her and made it a weapon. Taken a throne she had no right to and earned it through blood and courage. The Empire had tried to erase her. She'd rewritten it instead. "What are you thinking?" Caius asked. Arden smiled, silver light playing across her fingers. Visible now, undeniable, hers. That sometimes the best revenge is surviving, and becoming exactly what they feared. Caius laughed, pulling her close. "My terrifying queen. Your impossible queen." "That too." They stood together on the balcony as night fell over the capital, two souls bound by a bond that should have killed them. But they'd survived, thrived, changed the rules of an empire that thought it knew how power worked. And somewhere in the Hollow Quarter, the neighborhood where Arden had once struggled to survive, a young girl looked up at the palace lights and dreamed of being seen, just like a servant girl had not so long ago. The girl who'd been invisible, who became a queen, who rewrote the world.